All right. Speaking of absolute messes, let's talk about Washington, D.C. On the Patriot Mobile Newsmaker line, good friend of this program from Virginia's 5th Congressional District, Congressman Bob Good. Congressman, hope you're doing well today.
Doing great, Todd. Hope that you're well. Thanks for having me again.
I am. Congressman, real quick, we've been following the developments involving the House Freedom Caucus and the Speaker of the House. And right now, I guess it's gridlock. Can you explain what's going on and why nothing is moving right now with the legislation?
Well, in response to the $4 trillion debt increase that we passed last month, of course, I voted against that, as did 70 of my colleagues, which was a breach of the agreement under which Speaker McCarthy became the Speaker back in January. For those who were part of negotiating, voting for him as Speaker, that $4 trillion, or unconditional, frankly, debt ceiling increase was a breach of that agreement. It was a breach of the principles and the policies that were agreed to for us to move together as united Republican Conference. Frankly, a unity that was on display for almost 5 months before that vote. Again, an unconditional, essentially, debt ceiling increase that maintained all the Biden level of spending, which is the most egregious, most excessive, most wasteful, most reckless spending in the history of the country. And frankly, there was dishonesty about what was the content of the bill in order to try to sell the bill to the membership, to sell it to the media, to sell it to the country. It essentially keeps spending flat with no real cuts or reforms. But beyond that, it just broke the coalition that had been forged together, the governing coalition, the Republican Party, that was evidenced by the Limit, Save, Grow bill, the Parents' Bill of Rights, the energy bill that we passed, and the D.C. crime bill that got signed into law, my bill overturning this student loan transfer scheme, those sorts of things. And then there was retaliation against members voting against the rule for the bill.
And that's Congressman Andrew Clyde. Congressman Clyde, who's a regular on this program.
Yes, and beyond it just being retaliation for a member doing what he or she thought was right in voting against the rule, the procedural rule before the actual debt limit vote, which, by the way, 29 of us voted against, including Mr. Clyde and myself, and that made Speaker McCarthy has to go to the Democrats to get votes to advance the rule. But the bill that he was told as a consequence of voting against the rule that we would not bring to the House floor for a vote, his very important bill, protecting the rights of gun owners to have pistol stabilizing braces, and that was pulled from the floor. And he went public, frankly, as you know, with that information. And then, long story short, after a few days of back and forth, that bill is now scheduled for a vote on Tuesday. But that was an important step to get that bill back to the floor for a vote, scheduled for a vote on Tuesday. Hopefully it'll pass. And we're told that some of the senators on the Democrat senators will vote for it as well, I suppose because of re-election aspirations in Montana, West Virginia, and Arizona. But more importantly, we've got to revisit what we stand for as a conference, what policy we're going to pursue, what conservative policies, how are we going to cut spending, not if we're going to cut spending, but how we're going to cut spending, how much we're going to cut spending. The country's teetering, Todd, as you know. We are on the brink, and the only hope politically is the Republican Party being the Republican Party and doing the things the American people elected us to do. And that's what this is about right now. We put the brakes on the House floor with voting against the rule yesterday to say, hey, we're not going to go along just to get along and not do the things we committed that we were going to do when we ran for re-election and when we got the majority and when we moved together with the Speaker.
So Congressman, what is the end game here? What are you guys hoping happens as a result of putting the brakes on everything?
Well, part of the justification for the bill last week was, hey, we're just going to raise the debt ceiling, but we're going to really use the appropriations process, the budgetary process, the spending process to attack the spending. So we're going to see what we can do to force that to happen, to get commitments to that effect on the appropriations bills. But also there were other things that were committed back in January, things like putting out a balanced budget, a budget that would balance in 10 years, a vote on the floor for a balanced budget. That's been cast aside, has not happened. that there would be a vote on term limits. That's been cast aside. That has not happened. That we would. There was also a commitment from the Speaker that we would move forward with impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. Matter of fact, during the week of January, when you heard, this is really ruining our agenda because we're taking a few days to decide the Speaker vote, one of the examples of the thing, we can't go after impeaching Mayorkas because we haven't voted in a Speaker yet, which, of course, was not true. The committees were not prohibited from that. That was a strategic decision to keep the committees from being assigned. So we have just got to come back together, recommit on what we're going to pursue as a conference, because we're not going to. We need action, not acting. Not words, but actually action that moves the country forward from a fiscal standpoint. They want to vote on the REINS Act now after we took it out of the Failed Responsibility Act. We could have used the leverage of the debt ceiling to force the REINS Act. And the REINS Act, of course, being that bill that requires a congressional vote on every major rule or regulation that's passed by the agencies and departments, the unelected bureaucrats, which costs, hundreds of billions of dollars a year, trillions of dollars over time, that would require congressional members to go on record either overturning or affirming any major rule or regulation. That could have been it was in the Limit Save Grow bill, but that was something that could have been kept in the Failed Responsibility Act. And now we want to have a floor vote on it. Yesterday, it was going to be a show vote. We passed it out of the House as a messaging bill. Said, look, we stand for this, but we didn't have the resolve to keep it in the Failed Responsibility Act, and we had the leverage of the debt ceiling. Democrats will never willingly cut spending. You've got to be willing to use government shutdowns or the debt ceiling and every other means at your disposal.
All right. On the Patriot Mobile Newsmaker line, Congressman Bob Good. And Congressman, real quick, of course, a victory for you. The Senate passed your bipartisan resolution to stop President Biden's student loan transfer scheme. You got to feel very happy about that.
Very much so. We got it to the House floor, the Congressional Review Act, which it's a law that allows you to overturn something that you believe the executive branch does not have the authority to do. It's a privileged motion. So it passed out of the House on a bipartisan basis with 2 or 3 Democrats. It passed out of the Senate with, I think it was 3 Democrats as well. And so the president has threatened to veto it. But it's interesting. He himself said he didn't have the authority to do it a year ago. Speaker Pelosi said he didn't have the authority to do it a year ago. His own education secretary said it, and yet he did it anyway, knowing he didn't have that constitutional authority. Supreme Court is looking at it, may overturn it, but we didn't want to wait and depend on the Supreme Court. We're taking action as a Congress, and hopefully the president will think better of it, because it's not he doesn't have constitutional authority to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. Not to mention the fact that it's immoral to make people who didn't borrow that money have to pay for it.
All right. Well, good stuff there. And, Congressman, we're going to have to leave it there. Good luck. All eyes certainly are going to be on Washington, D.C. to see how this standoff gets resolved.
Thank you, Todd. Great to be with you.
All right. Congressman Bob Good out of the Commonwealth of